Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome to the show Alessandro Simari, who is a sessional lecturer and theater scholar who teaches theater studies, English literature, and composition and film studies, most recently at the University of Ottawa and Concordia University. Alessandro, welcome. We finally
Thanks,
got you
Robert.
on.
Yeah, I'm glad to finally be here. It's a long time coming. I'm glad I'm finally here.
Me too. Me too. For people who haven't seen To Be or Not to Be, or if you haven't seen it in a while, I'll just read a brief synopsis. Although this is hard to sum up because
Yeah,
it's such a thick plot. During the German occupation of Poland, an acting troupe becomes embroiled in a Polish soldier's efforts to track down a German spy, to say the least. This is directed by Ernst Lubitsch. It starred Carole Lombard, Jack Benny, Robert Stack. This is a major cast. Felix Bressart, Lionel Atwill, Stanley Ridges, Sig Ruman, Tom Dugan, Charles Halton. The list goes on and on. I don't believe Lubitsch wrote this.
he
Or I
did actually. It's one of the films that he's Lubitsch, former head of Paramount, obviously was involved in doing in greenlighting a lot of films. But as I understand it, Lubitsch, there's a lot of different writing credits on this film, but it's been said that the film itself is Lubitsch. Basically, everyone was just all the writers were stenographers for Lubitsch's ideas, and so the whole
okay.
plot, um, and the scenario was entirely dictated by him. So for better or for worse, Lubitsch got both the praise and the sort of slings and arrows, to use a
Right.
Hamlet phrase, based on the story.
Yeah, because on IMDb it just has him listed as uncredited. I know that's not everything here is not always 100%
Yeah,
accurate. Because it says Melchior Lengiel and Edwin Justice Meyer.
yeah.
Um, do you remember the first time you saw it, and how did you feel about it initially?
Yeah, well, so like many of the films that I have discovered, it being released on the Criterion Collection was sort of a major impetus to watch it. But
Mm,
but actually, sort of my work in theater studies sort of is interdisciplinary. So I'm interested in how theater signifies on film. Like how can we understand theater based on how this other medium like film talks about it. And To Be or Not to Be was one of those films that pretty much always came up on the list when you wanted to know about when you wanted to see a film that was really about theater. And so I sort of came to this film, and I should also say I have a history background as a having studied focused on World War II history and the Holocaust. So it was sort of weird that I didn't come to this film sooner. But when I did come to the film, I did come to it rather with an open mind and was surprised. First of all, it's definitely a film that you don't feel like it could be done in a very similar way today.
mm.
You have this idea. It's like, well, we're going to make a film and it's going to be about the Polish occupation or the Nazi occupation and invasion of Poland. Oh, by the way, it's also going to be a comedy, and a screwball comedy at that,
Yeah,
at points.
yeah.
Um, one feels like I know that there was a this product, it was done again, a remake,
Oh yeah, the
but
remake. Yeah.
yeah, but I don't really feel like um I say that I don't feel like this film would be made today, but in the same breath, a film like Jojo Rabbit and
Mm,
Inglourious Bastards clearly has a great is greatly indebted to Lubitsch's film, to the point
yeah.
that Tarantino said like there's a Hamlet reference in that is meant to be my reference to Be or Not to Be.
Mm.
Um, so I was sort of surprised by the film in a whole bunch of ways. Um, and especially shocked by the number of just sort of really sharp lines, like the most famous line, Joseph Tura did to Hamlet what we're doing to Poland,
All right.
which is funny in the most macabre way. And so I found the film on the first viewing delightful, but also like surprisingly modern and anachronistic at the same time. Modern in the sense it's edgy, anachronistic in the sense that I don't know if you could make this film in the same way that Lubitsch did today.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw the remake before because I only saw this a year ago.
Mm,
and like yourself, I have the Blu-ray now as
hmm.
well. And I saw the remake a number of years ago first, and I remember liking it, but I was listening to another podcast where they were saying that it was, they felt it was terrible. So I can't really comment too much on the remake. But yeah, you're right. It just feels like it couldn't be made in the same way today. And even at the time, it was shocking. I mean, Jack Benny's father, his own father walked out when he saw him dressed as a Nazi, and he had to convince him it was a satire in order for him to sit through it. And then apparently he loved it and watched it many, many, many times. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's so audacious, but yet so not only is it so funny, it
Mm,
also works as a propaganda piece. I mean, he clearly was seeing that people were not in America very interested in the war, and that people weren't, getting involved as much as they should. And so there are certain, wink winks to, I feel, that he's getting at towards, America and other countries. Like for example, the fact that he doesn't just portray the Nazis as outright evil people. Like he portrays them, like he's clearly making fun of them and that they're stupid and that just take orders, and any orders that come. Like, the funniest at the end, of course, is when they finally get away. I mean, it takes too long to explain how they get away in the
yeah.
plane, and they convince the Nazi pilots that the actor who is dressed as Hitler is Hitler. And then they're like, the Fuhrer would like to have a word with you. Jump. And they just like, yes, yes, hi, Hitler. They just jump to their death. That is, I mean, how do you make death that funny? How do you make suicide that funny? It's absolutely brilliant. But I think he was getting at the fact that, look, these people they're so afraid of Hitler,
Mm.
and they are human beings, right? And so there are, the more we can understand the way they think, the more perhaps we could get at them. I'm not
Yeah,
sure if that was your impression.
yeah, totally. And you can see how sort of, and and I'll just put my cards on the table. You can see how the sort of like unsophisticated takes about this film that were the contemporaneous unsophisticated takes that would say like, well, Lubitsch is making this film, but he's sympathizing with the Nazis, or he's making them human and
Right,
relatable.
right.
Is a laughable claim when you describe moments like the one you're describing, which points out the fact that in many cases there are people who are sort of like blindly leading this charismatic figure, but also there are moments throughout the film where sort of Greenberg, the character Greenberg, the Jewish character in the film, the Polish actor who's so desperate to perform Shylock's
Oh
Rialto
yeah,
scene in The Merchant of Venice, is
yeah,
constantly saying throughout the film that actually that'll get a laugh. Like even things, even and he
yes,
uses that line. I feel almost terrible for Felix Bressart, the character played Greenberg, because he basically only has three lines. One of them is like that'll get a laugh, and it'll end the Rialto scene, right? And
yeah,
and
yeah,
and the and hath not a Jew eye speech. But he actually sort of becomes the sort of like sage-like figure, and he constantly says, "That'll get a laugh." And you get this sort of impression that that Lubitsch's anti-fascist politics here are about showing these characters, the Nazis who are portrayed in the film, to be human and ridiculous, and
exactly,
and
yeah,
and and therefore, isn't it silly in that these people have such a hold on the Hitler has such a hold on this, because they're made to be derisive figures, people who you think are ridiculous and
mm,
worthy of satire, and therefore more easily defeated.
right,
Um, and so you have these scenarios where it's like these morons are willing to jump out of an airplane without a parachute because someone said so.
yeah,
So,
exactly,
so they can be easily defeated and laughed at, and I think I think the use of comedy in this film as a weapon is one of the smarter things it does, and for that reason, I think that people sort of missed the point there, the early
Yeah.
reception for this film, they really missed the point, as you so like sort of brilliantly said. Um, it is one of those things where I feel like I feel like Jack Benny's father's the anecdote, whether it's true or not, is the sort of thing where it's like if you find the Nazi character funny, you feel like that's a positive affirmation of that character. But
Right.
it's not. It's the
No.
scorpion's tail behind the joke that
Yeah.
these characters are to be laughed at, and they're not serious figures.
Yeah, exactly. And even when Bronsky, Tom Dugan, who plays Bronsky, and he's playing Hitler, and he's
Mm,
talking to the director, and the director is, talking to him just one on one, seeing him as, a fellow human being. And then it's interesting. One thing I picked up on, but this is just my own feeling about it,
mm,
was that he says to him, you're not convincing as Hitler. And he's like, well, what do you mean? He goes, no, you got to look like that picture. And he's like, well, that's me in the picture. And
yeah.
then it occurred to me that people look at evil as just like those strong figures, menacing looks with the swastika. And yeah, that's true, but we have to remember that they're human beings at the
Yeah.
same time, right? And I thought that was so interesting that the director was not convinced that he was this man just because he's now seeing him as a human being. And I think you in order to understand why people are so evil, we have to empathize with them to see where they're coming from and how to defeat them in this case. And he does that, and he does that in many ways, as we discussed, how playing, that they're taking blind orders and that they're really stupid, dumb and everything. But then on the flip side, we see someone like the professor who is not, he's the only one who's actually not funny in the
No.
film. He's, when they try to trick him, that, when they, again, it takes too long to go into the
Yeah,
context.
sure.
It's really a film you have to see, but here he is with these, he's working undercover as a double agent, and the Warsaw Resistance thinks he's with them, but he's actually with the Nazis, which they figure out. And so the actors pick him up and bring him to the theater because they have the sets, that's like the Nazi sets and the costumes, because he has the secret plans of the Warhol uprising. And so they pick him up, they bring him to the theater, and they pretend that they're the Nazis. And he figures out, no one else figures out. The other Nazis don't they never figure out that they're being conned.
No,
But he figures it out. And actually his death is not played for laughs. When he gets
no.
killed, it's serious. Whereas like Earnhardt at the end is totally played for laughs. And when he has that line, which again, it's scary, like, because he is just like this ordinary person, and he says to Maria Tura, he wants her to work for them.
No.
And then he says to her, we're human just like you. And it's like, oh, you know what? That's true. And that's what you have to realize.
Yeah, so the film is constantly doing this, and part of the reason why I taught a course called theater at the movies, and part of the
Right.
reason why my students were so they reacted so amazingly to this film
Oh, good.
because they really like the idea of the constant doubling of the fake and the real.
Yeah.
And so actually, um one of my I can't take credit for this, unfortunately. I have to be honest. One of my students came up with this brilliant point where it's actually Seletsky is the only Nazi in the film who's competent.
Yes.
Because everyone else is incompetent, or at least any of the major characters are the major Nazi characters are incompetent. And what it actually and the point that was made, which I think is super super insightful, is that actually the people who sort of become indoctrinated into Nazi propaganda partly through and here we're elaborating beyond the sort of diegetic world, but you assume that Earhart and Schultz are Nazis partly because of their circumstances. I mean, you can't
Right.
imagine this fully, but you understand that they're part of a system now, including through the reiteration of jokes about Hitler being a piece of cheese, right? They find this funny. There's a sort of like there's chinks in their armor, as it were. Like
Right.
you can imagine their stupidity as a way of exploiting them and perhaps even and defeating them. But Seletsky, of course, um is a convert. He's not born a Nazi. He's born a patriotic Pole.
Right.
And that's the more dangerous. That's
Mm,
more
yeah.
dangerous because Seletsky is stands apart from the system, and he sees the destruction that the Nazis have wrought upon his own people. And yet, nonetheless, we see him continue to be this super um, dangerous,
Yeah.
creepy, menacing figure, and not just for Maria Tura, but in general. He sees through Jack Benny's facade when he's playing concentration camp Earhart. And so as a result, the idea of the convert as being the convert to fascist ideology as being more dangerous
Yeah.
than the genuine article is really interesting, because also during this period of time, Lubitsch is making films in the Hollywood system, and I haven't seen this in the criticism of this film, but the American isolationist movement and during the Second World War coincided pretty staunchly with the nativist fascist movement in America. So
Mm,
showing the idea of these figures who become converted and therefore to fascism and therefore
right.
are more dangerous suggests to me that Lubitsch is not merely showing Americans in European context, but also talking to American audiences domestically, saying,
Yeah.
be careful what you wish for. Because Zelensky does not necessarily strike me as human in Lubitsch's film, in the same way that Earhart, with all his foibles and clear paranoia for his own position,
Mm,
does strike me as Lubitsch humanizing him.
yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's the brilliance of it. I mean, he's sort of he has they had this insight into the many different ways in which evil is formed, while doing it in such a hilarious fashion. I mean, when you watch the film, like, I think if I had read it on paper, I may have think, well, how this is not going to work, but then yet it does, and it hits so many different it hits so many different tones, so brilliantly. I love the fact that they call it To Be or Not to Be, and that Tura, who
Hmm.
Jack Benny plays, wants to do Hamlet, is also, and he's doing Hamlet, but then when he gets to England at the end, of course, that's his request to do Hamlet. And, because Hamlet is a guy who's indecisive,
Hmm.
and, he cannot make up his mind what to do. And I thought, well, what a perfect metaphor,
Yeah.
in the film, To Be or Not to Be, because we have these actors and they have no doubts
Hmm.
about getting involved here, and trying to save their own country. I mean, we'll get into some of their motives, because they're not
Yeah.
just purely good people, which is very, very interesting and
No.
funny. But again, to be or not, and I think that was sort of, it's kind of up to us. Should we or should we not do something here? And because I kept thinking there's got to be a reason why he called it this. I don't know if that was your thoughts.
Yeah. So I think it's bold as all get out to take Hamlet's fundamental existential question, whether or not he should continue to live and suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or he should end his troubles and kill himself.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a bold choice by Lubitsch to take that line and to, number one, sort of apply it to the existential situation of Poland after the
Right.
1940 invasion.
Right.
Uh, will Poland be or not be? And also simultaneously, and this is part of, again, the joke with the scorpion's tail lingering behind it, that Lubitsch's film is full of, give that line of Shakespeare's probably most existential philosophical characters, and give that to Jack Benny, who uses it as a punchline, not once, not twice, not three times, but four times, and including on the very last scene of the play, where you see that the problem continues. And then also this title has this interesting double meaning of truth and sort of facade to it, whether something is or is not what it appears to be. And you constantly see that in this film, where you have the thing shown, and then or you have the performative version of something shown, and then you see the sort of quote unquote real or genuine article. And what you find in the film is time and time again the question of the to be, the real, and the not to be, the sort of pretend version, are sort of like mirror or perverse images of it. So
Mm,
you have the fake Hitler, who we know is Bronsky, and there's a concern that it's not the real Bronsky, to the point that even the real Bronsky dressed as Hitler in the portrait, as you mentioned, one of the best moments, is said
yeah.
to not be Hitler enough, even, or not Bronsky enough to be Hitler. And then of course the little girl
Oh
on
yeah.
on the streets of Warsaw goes up to him and asks him for an autograph. And now if you're a bit actor who basically all you do is hold spears in Hamlet, and all of a sudden someone comes up to you and asks for your autograph, that's a moment of jubilation.
Yeah.
But of course, what it shows is that Bronsky is not a good enough actor because you can see through his facade.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
the same way that you have when Jack Benny, when Joseph Tura is playing the role of concentration camp Earhart, and he thinks he gets shot,
Oh yeah.
and you have this moment which is a classic moment of screwball comedy, right? Where it's a sort of like someone thinks they got shot and they grab at the back and they're
Yeah.
looking for the blood, and he says, like, something to the extent of like "Long live Poland." You have the sort of performative version of that where Jack Benny doesn't realize that he's not actually dying. And then in one of and then like where this film sort of modulates between screwball comedy and thriller, when you have the real chase in the theater scene, which is
Mm,
highly theatricalized, not just because of its location, but also like the entirely implausible plausible use of a searchlight, of the spotlight as a spotlight, as a searchlight. You then have the moment where the slow raising of the curtain, and of course Seletsky is doing what Jack Benny was doing
right.
just before, but limply trying to do the Hitler salute. And so you constantly have this film. So the title is brilliant in that sense because it constantly captures this film's interest in both the performative and the
Yeah.
real and the relationship between those two things. And very often suggesting in a very sort of modern theater studiesy way that actually things that we perform aren't like fake in a sense, but they are approximations of the real.
Mm, yeah.
And so I love that about this film, and the title really does encapsulate that. And I wonder whether I mean, you have any sort of insight into this idea of like characters constantly um performing something that ends up becoming real. Like you have Colonel Concentration Camp Earhart. The line about that is a joke, but when Benny encounters the real Earhart, the jokes are the same. It's the one that he came up with improv.
I love that because I mean that was that's another thing that's so brilliant is that Jack Benny got to play Tuda, but then he's Tuda as the Nazi at the beginning in the very in the play within the film.
Yeah.
Then he's concentration camp Earhart. Then he's Seletsky. Then he's another Nazi at the end. And I love that he, as a result of playing concentration camp Earhart, he then learns some real things about
Yes.
him. Because Seletsky comes in and says, "Oh, they call you concentration camp Earhart," and then when he's playing Seletsky, says the same thing to the real Earhart. And then it's interesting because he even begins, well, he may have already sort of known this, but he even begins to pick up the characteristics of Earhart in a real way, like I mean of Seletsky in a real way, because when Earhart he laughs about that joke
Yes.
about Hitler, he suddenly just says, "What's so funny?" And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
And
brilliant. Oh my God. That's
yeah.
it's like he's learned something and he's adapting it to the role, in an improv scenario.
And even Benny, when he starts performing as Seletsky, um, even his sort of like his like oral posture and how he delivers lines. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unsurprising given Benny's impressive CV, particularly in radio comedies and dramas, that he has the skill to, like, of course, Jack Benny can do the improvisation,
Yeah.
but he does it in such a slight way that you're invited to forget the fact that Benny is playing Tura, playing Seletsky, you're invited to sort of ignore that, and you start to see the veracity of that performance. There's it's never fully it's never fully opaque. You always
Right.
see Jack Benny and Joseph Tura underneath the Seletsky,
Yeah.
and that's part of the comedy of it. It's the knowledge that we have of Jack Benny in that role. But I also find there's a real switch in the film about halfway through when Jack Benny. This film is really like, it seems to me like when characters are talking, they're in powerful positions. They're dictating action. When
Mm,
characters are passive and receiving information, they're on the back foot. So when
right.
Jack Benny is listening, for instance, to Maria and Sabinski tell them about like why another man is in his slippers, Jack Benny's thoroughly confused, and he's behind the ball and he lacks information. But in future scenes, even when Jack Benny seems to be behind, lacking a bunch of knowledge, or in an informational disadvantage, as soon as he starts talking, as soon as he starts performing the role, and he starts relying upon these sort of pat phrases about like, well, of course, Hitler beautifies the garden. Like he has no informational knowledge, but if you perform the knowledge, if you're active
Right.
about it, you do you get by. And
Yeah.
and so it shows like there's no substance behind the sort of these hierarchies that are being shown to be so dominant,
Right.
and in the Gestapo, in the film, because it can all be sort of masqueraded and mimicked and mocked, um, just merely by sort of like taking pat phrases and responding back to them.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
like the comedy in this film never seems to be very far away. The brilliant comedy in this film, I should say,
Yeah.
never seems to be very far away from like that political perspective
Yeah.
of like these are terrible people
Yeah.
and we should laugh and mock them.
Right. Right. And talk about someone who looks totally different when he puts on a mustache. I mean,
Oh,
when Benny just puts on a mustache, he looks like a totally different person.
totally does. And graying the temples and doing the
Yeah.
whole thing. And it's like, of course a theater company would be able to do this, right? So it's sort of all of these effects are grounded very beautifully in the diegesis of the film. Including the ultimate sacrifice that the Bressart's Greenberg character makes, like a Jewish actor
Mhm.
who's longing to be the central figure, uh, sacrifices himself, notably the only character who doesn't escape Poland and gets to perform Shylock on a stage, does so within a theater, but he does so as a sort of like great sacrifice. So like this, even early on, you have these moments where you have Greenberg's Rialto speech becomes a bit of a joke. He seems like this sort of derisive actor who's always constantly to being bigger than the roles he gets.
Right.
By the end, he gets the biggest role, which is he becomes the veritable hero of the
Mm.
film.
Does he not? I see. That's the thing with this film is that no matter how many times you see it, you
Mm,
can't pick up on everything because
mm,
like it's so there's all these plans and motions and twists and turns in a good way. But I didn't realize that he does not. Does he not get away? Because I thought they took him away, but it was Benny and them who took him
mm.
away.
Well,
Unless I missaw it.
we don't see him on the plane,
That's right. Yeah.
and we don't see him landing in the parachute,
Oh
and we
wow.
never see
I
him in the
never picked up on
audience.
that.
Mm.
Yeah.
So there is a suggestion that when they're in the theater, Polsky, so he leaves with Benny's men,
Yeah.
like take him away, bring him to blah 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 blah. But he's still in Poland. So whether or not so maybe it's an overstatement to say he dies or maybe he sacrifices himself. Clearly, he does sacrifice himself in some way because he's not on the plane.
That's
So
interesting. Yeah.
there is something of self-sacrifice that happens there, a tragic self-sacrifice, a heroic self-sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly possible that even though it's Benny's men who take him, I mean there was so many Nazis there. I mean, who knows?
Right.
They could have you know, stepped in and took over before they got into the cars or what have you. But that's so brilliant. You're right, because that is that's one of the most moving parts of the film to me is when he does Shylock's speech because he does it at the beginning
Yes.
when him and the other actor are, they're complaining that they don't get better parts, and he's like, one day you're gonna do Shylock, and he does it for him, and it's very, very moving. And then finally at the end, he he gets he gets his chance to play it, but
Yeah.
he's playing it in a way where he's acting, but yet it's also totally real, because he's actually saying that to the real Nazis when they, because, again, just to briefly sum that part up, their plan is to basically pretend that
Yes.
this guy is trying to assassinate Hitler in a theater, because Hitler's actually there. And so as he's moving in, the Nazis move in, and so do Benny and his men. And so then he says to everyone, if you prick us, do we not bleed? And it's so funny and so outrageous, yet so tragic and moving, because we know that he's actually speaking to real Nazis. I mean, how did they come up with that?
It's partly the brilliance, like, repetition with variation is sort of a standard
Yes,
structural
yes,
um structural way of creating meaning, whether it's in script or with dialogue or visually or musically or what have you, like leitmotifs and stuff like that. To Be or Not to Be is constantly doing that, not only through the sort of repetition of like the false and the real,
yeah,
but also and then obviously the To Be or Not to Be line that Tura keeps on getting savaged by, as someone in the first or second. It has to be someone in the first or second row, because it has to
yeah.
be someone that Tura can see, especially a narcissist like Tura. Like, um, but also with the with Greenberg's Rialto scene, it's interesting because, as you and I both well know, is that, try as we might to sort of imbue lines with meaning when we sort of like say them in a rehearsal space, or, in the shower as we're trying to commit lines to memory, that actually doing so never fully has the meaning, right? Because it's abstracted from the context. There's no,
Right.
if you're saying the Rialto scene and you're saying it because you want to prove how good you can do it, that's all fine and well, but there has to be a purpose. There has to be a context to it.
Yes.
So it's interesting that you have the Greenberg character, honestly, kind of, in my reading anyway, seeming a little pathetic in the first
Yeah.
instances, both him and Bronsky, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're spear holders, right?
Right.
We're fairy number four in A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah.
But the difference is that even though Greenberg in the final assessment isn't speaking the Rialto scene on the stage, not as Shylock, not on the London stage, it has meaning finally. And that's the sort of difference, because he delivers the lines, Bresser delivers the lines nearly identically every time he says
Yes.
it. The
Yes.
the difference is context, right? And
Exactly. Yeah.
it's the classic like Kuleshov effect, right? Like, the first time it means nothing, the second time it means a little bit more, the third time it means a lot, even though it's the same delivery.
Right.
and
Right.
and it's and that's a real credit to Lubitsch, to understanding that something that is funny in one scene, banal in another scene, can be tragic and heartrending in the
Ah,
final
yes,
assessment.
yes. I know, it's stunning. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. And what I could actually, in a way, relate to Greenberg and Bronsky, because here in, Toronto, as an actor myself, Toronto is known as like Hollywood North, right? So we get so many American productions where they're often bringing their casts, and so the Canadians play really, really either small parts, sometimes bigger parts, but small parts, or where they have background performers and stuff
Mhm.
like that, which is essentially what they are, which is what they're complaining about, and they think they have more talent and they deserve
Yeah,
more. And that's something that a lot of us, not only in Canada but actors in general, can relate to. But I could particularly relate to that. But then it was so interesting, because then once the theater is, the bombing starts, and then the play
yeah,
gets canceled, and now the spears become shovels outside as they're shoveling the snow, and they're like, if we could only carry a spear again.
that's right.
And I thought to myself, that just reminds me that I should appreciate what I have, because hey, if there was a war here, and suddenly you couldn't even do what you do, and I love that. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just, that's just an incredible insight into actors.
yeah. I also like the fact that actors are constantly being made fun of in this film.
Yeah,
Um, I have to say, like, as not an actor, but someone who's has pretenses to working
right,
in theater, and certainly he's
right.
a critic of theater. I love the idea that actors just never change their stripes. Like, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're performing in literally a life and death situation when you're facing the Gestapo, or whether you're facing, the pretty standard bourgeois audience of the Theater Polski in before the invasion. The one thing that matters is the actor's ego, right? Because
Yeah, yeah.
Jack Benny is in the middle of this, like, the thing that allows Jack Benny to do, or I should stop saying Jack Benny. The thing that allows Joseph Tura to um uh the skill set that he has, that allows him to use his professional capacity to disappear as a human and and effectively become another human, and do it so well and so convincingly that you're able to ape the mannerisms and gestures and voices of real and imagined Nazis. He can nevertheless not shake the fact that he's a bleeding narcissist, and you hear something, and you hear something that is personally related to you, and you cannot shake the
You can't
urge
help it.
to indulge yourself in your own narcissism. And it
Yeah,
constantly happens, and that's the sort of the frisson of those scenes, because it happens all the time that you're having these self-conscious reference or self-references of Joseph Tura and Maria Tura when they're with the sort of, like, I hate to say it this way because obviously I mean it much more seriously, but the sort of like bog standard Nazis,
right.
Erhard and Schultz, they're sort of derisive figures. But of course, it takes Seletsky, to my earlier point, it takes Seletsky to actually see through the disguise.
Yeah,
And again, it's why Seletsky is such a dangerous character,
exactly,
but
exactly.
and also why actors are dangerous to themselves in this film, right? Because they could be quiet, right? That's also
Mm,
part of the, like, they don't have to do what they're doing,
right.
but they have a particular skill set, not to quote Taken, that's a different, and they need to use it in order to protect themselves, protect the nation, and what have you.
Right. Well, that's what's so, it's so brilliant that the irony of the film is that the actors are the heroes, but they are not purely they're not purely, this is just my
No.
own take, but they're not purely doing this to save Poland, to save the Warsaw Uprising. For one thing, Tuda initially jumps in because he sees how much his wife Maria
Mm.
and her potential lover there are getting worked up about it, and he's already very suspicious. This guy, that's what, which we'll get into, is this love triangle. Is at the beginning, this guy is a admirer of her, sending her flowers and cards and everything, which Joseph Tuda knows about. And when war breaks out, he sees how riled up they are together, passionate. And then he initially gets in, and he even says, I don't even know what everything's about, but I'm in, right? And it's
Yeah.
and it's partly because he doesn't, he's like, this guy's not gonna take my wife,
Right, right.
and then everything else, again, it's the opportunity to perform. I mean, yes, they want to save the Warsaw Uprising and save the country, but the plays are canceled. There's nowhere to perform, and this is their own this is their only chance to continue their art. And I thought, wow,
Yeah.
brilliant. It's not black and white, I mean,
No, and it's sort of like, and of course the film plays this for laughs, but it's not fully comedic. But when Tura says in that scene, that brilliant scene, where he's front to facing the camera in sort of a medium close, and you have, on the one hand, you have his Maria saying, explaining what the audience already knows, and Sabinski explaining what the audience already knows, and of course we're just watching Jack Benny react and saying, like, well, how is he absorbing?
yeah,
I mean, you've said this a few times, but it's like, how do you describe this? Well, this film tries to describe the plot of
yeah,
this story,
right.
and Tura has no capacity to keep up with this. And so what he does is he relies upon the two things that he knows are important. He says, "I love my country and I love my slippers." And so the joke being, of course, that he when he shows up and he goes home, for people he really don't know how, Sabinski is wearing Jack Benny's legs or
Right.
Joseph Tura slippers. So I
Right.
love my country and I love my slippers, and that's all sort of Joseph Tura needs to know. He needs to protect both.
Yeah.
But one can't help but feel that he especially loves his slippers.
Right.
Um, there's just there's that little self-interest that makes the Joseph Tura character interest. He's a narcissist in a
Yeah.
way that is sort of like a classical depiction of actors as being perennially narcissistic. Like how else could you do this role where you stand under a spotlight? Like you
Right.
have to be a little
Exactly.
narcissistic. Um,
Absolutely.
I also do like, just as a little repeated thing, the idea that Shakespeare is not dangerous, right? Like it's just a wonderful thing that like a lot of people today talk about theater as being like a potentially radical place, but of
Mm,
course, like not all theater is radical, was politically radical in the same way. And sort of
right.
having the moment where the Gestapo canceled the play about Hitler,
Yes.
but allow Shakespeare to proceed, sort of
Right.
sort of suggests that
Ah,
a lot of
I
that
never picked
radical
that up.
content,
Right.
that it's not that theater is necessarily dangerous because Shakespeare has sort of been depoliticized, but it's
Right.
there's something potentially dangerous about actors themselves, and how they can appear to be someone else
Yeah.
that makes them particularly effective as spies. And it can go either way, because clearly in this film they're working for the resistance, but Maria Tura is never really in danger of becoming a Nazi spy, but one
Right.
one does suggest that she's one more kiss and one spoonful of caviar away from becoming a Nazi spy, right? And
Right.
someone who wasn't as committed to the cause as Maria Tura is, and indeed as Carole Lombard was in real
Yes.
life.
Yes.
With that these things can go either way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said. And I love how he was able to explore this love triangle and get through the production code at the time, because and he even did this in his pre-code films, because his characters are never just saying something explicitly. They're always sort of coded language. And that scene between Maria and what's his name again now?
Sabinski.
So sorry, Seletsky. No, not
Oh,
Seletsky. You're right. Sorry, Sabinski. The her admirer there
yeah.
is so actually sexually charged, because he's this bomber pilot, and he's talking about the fact that he could drop all this dynamite in 2 minutes from his plane, and she's aroused, and we know like what they're getting at, and, plane dropping dynamite. And then he even says to her, and I didn't pick this up until my last viewing, he says to her, "Did you want to see my plane?" She goes, "Maybe." And again, like, because you couldn't at the time show like explicitly a married couple and having an affair. We don't know exactly what happened when, like, because she did go on his plane, right? And again, when you say slippers, how did he get these slippers, right?
Yeah.
So the suggestion is that perhaps like she actually slept with this guy, and possibly that she's even been having like affairs, and Tura is perhaps just that's perhaps where his jealousy comes from, that he puts up with it, because her dresser, which is very, very
Mm,
funny, is when he comes in, the pilot, and he's admiring her and complimenting her, they keep cutting to the dresser sort of rolling her eyes, and it's almost a
exactly.
suggestion like this has happened before.
Exactly so.
And one thing I don't know, well, I don't think modern audiences could pick up on this, because I didn't, but I heard Joseph McBride, who I've interviewed before, he wrote a book on Lubitsch,
Mm,
which I haven't read yet, but I plan to read. But he said actually one of the jokes there is, because he says to her, the pilot says to her, "Oh, you read about these things about her in these fan magazines, like Goldfish, like
oh yeah.
how's your goldfish?" She doesn't know what he's talking about at first, and then she said, "Oh, yes, yes," and it's a joke, because at the time there were these fan magazines in Hollywood that made these stories up about celebrities that were all lies, and it was sort of, making fun of that. And I don't know, did you realize that? Because I never really realized that.
So the only reason I know this is I did clue into the idea that he had been reading sort of like uh personnel or personal profiles in these sort of magazines. The only reason I know that is because I when I was younger, I ended up buying a couple of them from used bookstores.
Ah, yes.
Just you see, it's like, oh, this is interesting.
Yes.
$5, sure.
I used to
Um,
have one. I don't know where it is, but I used to
huh.
have one.
Yeah. So and it's the sort of thing that people do now, except the medium is sort of Instagram and TikTok and
Right.
so on and so on.
Right.
But you're right about the sort of structure of the suggestion that this love triangle is, maybe a square or a pentagon or a hexagon, because it ever expanding outwards.
Right.
Because again, as part of the whole idea of Lubitsch, at least in this film, I'm not as well caught up on my Lubitsch as you are. It's something I want to catch up on. But in any case, Lubitsch constantly does this in this film, to the point that the final scene is not some sort of moment of great Polish liberation. It's, of course, Jack Benny, or I should say Joseph Tura, saying to be or not to be. And Sabinski is not the person who gets up in the second row, but some other young, attractive
Yes.
looking pilot
Yes.
figure who
Yes.
gets up and leaves. And now Joseph Tura and Sabinski are turning around and looking at this person getting up and disrupting the show.
Right.
So you've totally caught on to that, this idea that this film is really skirting around the question of Maria Tura's infidelity, but notably that doesn't make her a bad person.
Right.
Right,
Right.
like the idea of having a character a woman, especially, heavens forbid, who's
Yes.
not faithful to her husband, and yet is nonetheless one of the heroes of the character, and
Right.
indeed gets top billing despite what that says behind me,
Oh, yes. Yes.
is unheard of, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and it really goes to suggesting the way that Lubitsch, perhaps because of his background as a studio exec, and this being a transition point in the code, really is working that system brilliantly. As
Mm.
far as I understand it, Lubitsch didn't often need to get censored because
No.
he sort of knew
Yeah. Not
the way
really.
around the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think I believe in this film. I don't know if it was this film. For any, maybe if anyone knows, they can comment and let me know if I have this right. But people, if they did question things like, well, are you suggesting that an affair happened here? Or are you suggesting she cheated? Or he'd be like, well, it doesn't say that. That's only happening in your dirty mind, right?
Sure. Yeah, like
So
what dreams are you having in
yeah,
your spare time?
yeah, exactly. And what I love, again, and this is sort of like part of is sort of a joke on actors, is because then once the pilot, he thinks that they're going to be together and she'll leave her husband. He goes, oh, you'll have to leave the theater. That's what she was like. Whoa, 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 whoa. I love my husband. And I love that all we know about their problems are the fact that one's a bigger star than the other. I mean,
Right,
because
right.
they're like, that's what they argue about, right? And I once knew a couple who were both actors, and they would there is a competition, like, naturally you're in the same industry, there is a competition there, which I think there's something really realistic about that.
Yeah, and as far as I know from this film, because obviously it was Carole Lombard's last role before she
Yes.
she passed away. As far as I know, Carole Lombard was very, very glad to do this role,
Yeah, I read that.
including knowing that she was effectively a supporting actor in the
Right.
film.
Right.
And so actually her generosity as an actor and as a professional, sort of allowing this film, indeed, sort of like being, as far as I understand it, quite playing quite a significant role in the film getting funding,
Yes.
um, is remarkable. And so it's a real sort of it's a real sort of testament to Carole Lombard as an actor, who I mostly knew from 20th Century and the sort
I
of
still
like
have to see that,
amazing, it's
which is
beautiful
also a
film.
theater
Exactly.
about actors, right? Yeah, I have to see that.
Yeah, I won't promote my Letterboxd, but I have a list of theaters at the movies. So half of them feel like
Oh,
they
I'll have to check that list
are
out.
peripherally related to Carole Lombard, but
Yeah.
it's a real credit to Carole Lombard on the film, and just I'm just aware of the fact that we haven't mentioned her much, just
Right.
to say that she is tremendous in this film.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's a real tragedy that the way she passed,
Yeah.
promoting the film in a plane crash, as she was sort of visiting American troops. But her role in this film as the sort of self-conscious character who seems to, I think, only apart from Greenberg, have a real sense as to how things are actually the real politics of this moment and the real stakes here. And you never get the sense that you get a little bit of a sense that she's egotistical in the sense that she likes flowers and she likes admirers,
Right.
but you
Right.
never get the sense that, unlike Joseph Tura, that she might sacrifice her stuff. Like
Right.
she'd be willing to sacrifice aspects of herself, whereas you never really get the sense of Joseph Tura as being that pure selfless hero.
Right. Well, she's actually the one who kicks it all off in a sense
Yeah.
of helping the worst the Warsaw uprising,
Yeah.
because it's really her the pilot. I don't know why his name keeps dropping
It's
from.
because it's Sobinski and Seletsky.
That's what
So it's
that see
like,
that's
yeah, I mean, little note for Ernst Lubitsch, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
maybe
Mix
slightly
up the
different
names
names.
a little
Yeah.
bit, but because Sabinski
Yeah.
is, he is convinced that Seletsky is cannot, that he's not, that he must be,
Mm,
a liar, that he must be a Nazi because he didn't know who Maria Tura was when he tried
right.
to get a letter to her, and she's, such a famous star. It's like, there's no way that you couldn't know her.
Yeah.
And if you were from Poland, and so he risks his life to get a message to Warsaw, to Poland, to that, to watch out for this guy, that he's dangerous, and he can't get there. And so where does he go? He goes to her, and so then
Yeah.
she goes to deliver that message, right? And so in a way, without her, they would have never even found out about this.
Yeah, and I also think that Lubitsch just made a brilliant touch in writing. Well, I don't know. I kind of want to give direct credit to Lubitsch. It might have been one of the other people in the writing room to put to again, even in this moment, say like the actual political act of like trying to stop Seletsky involved art. It's involving putting a photograph in a
Yes,
copy of Anna
right,
Karenina.
right.
Because that could have been anything, right? So the choice is absolutely deliberate, and I think it's really very insightful point, because you know we and sometimes in this film, like at the very beginning of the film, the audience is sort of put off kilter because we don't actually know really what's going on. Like you have the sort of narration, like Hitler and Warsaw, what is he doing here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you sort of have this moment of unreality in a sort of radio drama sense.
Right, right.
And when Lombard's tour, Maria Tura, walks into that bookstore, and you don't really have a full clue what happened to whether or not Sabinski died, or what happened, and sort of we're surprised that Jack Benny is when we find them in Joseph Tourist slippers. But when you see Maria walking into the bookstore and asking for it, all of a sudden you see like an explicitly political act, right? Like and it's quite an interesting moment where you see someone without thinking. We don't have that moment where you see her contemplate. It's just she's pure action.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And as you just mentioned, what I love so much about the opening is that we, the audience, are also being tricked, like
Totally.
they're making it look like this is all really happening. Until of course he says Heil myself when everyone's saying Heil Hitler, and then the cuts to the director saying, no, 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 you can't, you're improvising, right? And
Yeah.
because he doesn't have any lines. And so he wants to say something. And so we are being deceived, and the whole film is about deception and role playing, and people being tricked. And I couldn't help but wonder, if did you ever see Elaine May's first film, A New Leaf?
I did see the new leaf. Yeah.
I can't help but wonder if this was an influence on that, because in that film, very very similar, it opens and it looks like it's an operation,
Mm,
and they're talking to uh Walter Matthau, the main character, and it looks like they're doctors, and they're like, well, we're gonna have to do this and that, and he's taking it very, very seriously, and the camera pulls back, and it's his car.
Yeah.
And it's because he's like this rich guy, so attached to his possessions. And of course, as the film unfolds, he's also deceiving people, he's role playing, he's lying to people. I can't help but wonder if this was an influence on that.
What I would really like to know is to hear from and you know and your audience, who obviously has cumulatively a wider film knowledge than you and I could possibly manage. I'd be really interested to know films that people suggest have been directly influenced, other than the sort of Jojo Rabbit and
Right.
Inglorious Bastards and maybe A New Leaf, because it seems to me that this film has somewhat collapsed, like the reception for this film has somewhat collapsed on the
Mm,
weight of people afraid of the
yeah.
idea of a comedy about Nazism and about the invasion of Poland. So
Right.
I'm wondering if not in subject matter, then at least in terms of aesthetics, or that sort of pulling the audience, the rug under the feet of the audience in the opening moments, whether or not there's other films that draw on that idea. That I don't know if it was originated here. I suspect not, but it's certainly the best version of that I've
Yeah.
seen.
Yeah, I haven't seen it too often. I mean, obviously, Billy Wilder,
Mm,
not that this I can't think of a film where he did like that, where he deceived the audience, but he was highly influenced by Lubitsch. He even had a sign in his office, how would Lubitsch do it? He was one of the screenwriters on Ninotchka and other films that
yeah.
Lubitsch directed. And I mean, the one thing that I've noticed in a lot of Wilder films is people role playing and
Mhm.
playing and to con others, to trick others. And that I it's impossible not to think that he got that from Lubitsch or
Yeah, sort of like the thing I like about To Be or Not To, because obviously like every sort of thriller or heist film or has a film that has a con artist has someone who's doing the double role, right?
right,
Like the
right,
Claude Chabrol films that he did in the 90s, sort of have that sort of con artist
yeah,
and the constant deceptions, and most film noirs have someone who's being deceptive.
right,
But I really like the idea of having characters whose job is to be other people.
right.
Like that's such a, on the one hand, a very obvious subject matter for theater and film, but nevertheless it's one of those, sort of like it's sort of like the not the poet who keeps on writing about the fact that they cannot write poetry. Having film go back to that subject is brilliant, and doing it in the way that Lubitsch does at the beginning, where it's sort of self-consciously pulling the rug under the feet of the audience members, is I'd love to just have someone trace the lineage of
Mm.
that type of narrative structure at the beginning of films.
Yeah, I would too. I certainly would too. I know just from our, it just popping out of my head as we're talking, but I know that Robert Osborne,
Mm.
because did you ever watch that TV show? I think it only ended not too long ago, where it was Theater Talk, where people
Oh,
went
sure.
on.
I'm familiar with it, but I haven't seen it intimately. No.
Yeah, because it's pretty good, and actually he went on to, I can't recall if they specifically were only going to talk about movies that were about theater, but him with his vast film history knowledge, that came up, and he gave a lot of great recommendations. So actually, I should find the link and put it in the description box, because
Mm.
it is a fascinating topic for you know for myself, and I know for you as well, having taught
Yeah.
a course on movies exploring theater. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about the film?
No, not especially. Although just on that also subject, I'd say that it's an academic book called Theaters
Oh,
on Film:
yes.
How the Cinema Imagines the Stage, by the author Russell Jackson. I
Oh,
don't think
right.
it's I don't think necessarily I agree with a lot of things that with most of the things that Russell Jackson says, but if you're interested in exploring the topic of sort of theaters at the movies, you should definitely look at that, for if for no other reason that he compiles a really great list. And unsurprisingly, a lot of the films he recommends are the sort of early sound films like 42nd Street, Footlights on Broadway,
Right,
Lullaby of
right,
Broadway, stuff like that.
right.
As opposed to like, Birdman and stuff, more modern films.
Mm. Oh, right.
But it's a rich subject, so I'm really glad to have had, the chance to talk about this film
Yeah.
in particular with you.
Yeah, no, me too. It was great to finally have you on. And what are you working on these days? What
Yeah, so at the moment I'm actually writing an academic book about the history of ushers
All right. I think you mentioned that. Yeah.
in the from the 18th from the 16th century forwards, because sort of I'm officially trained as a theater historian,
All
so we'll
right.
do that. And then actually in the longer run I am planning on writing an academic edited essay collection about theater at the movies. And so
Right.
I'm hoping that by the time I get to that, some of my undergraduate students have become PhDs, so I don't have to go through the groundwork, and they can just be my contributors.
Great. Fantastic. Well, I look forward to those. And I know you're not a big social media
Yeah,
person, but you did mention your letterbox handle.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what is your handle if people want to check out
Sure,
your
it's
lists?
AGS 1897, which is the delightfully anachronistic way of naming things. And if you want to follow me on X or Twitter, I never post, but it's what art mad, which is that's a line from King Lear. So
Right.
if you're not sick of Hamlet and you want to see some King Lear content, follow me
There
on
you go.
X.
There you go. All right, great. Well, I will leave those links in the description box below where you can follow Alessandro to see what he's working on. Well, Al, again, thanks so much. This was such a great chat. Thanks for coming on, and let's do it again sometime soon.
Great to be on here. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is exclusive content that I create month in and month out. And as a subscriber, you are able to vote on polls and contribute to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on the thanks link and you can leave a donation there if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner. To your top left in just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Also, click the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, you can also share the episode. All of these things are what produce traction to my YouTube channel. So I appreciate you watching and thank you again. And I will see you in the next episode.